I feel like I look like I'm trying too hard. They also have the label. Right, you ready?
Mm.
Are you sure?
Mm.
You awake?
Mm.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We've got Nozzy Gilbs joining us again today.
Ciao, ciao.
If you're new, Noah is my husband. We've been married for 2 years, which is
Crazy.
cray. We did a video like this last year after we've been married for a year, just kind of talking about the highs and lows of marriage, some of the difficulty, the good stuff, and I put out on my Instagram asking if anybody had any questions, and we did that again this year. 2 years has looked slightly different than first year, and yeah, so I've got some questions which we'll go through and we'll just have a little bit of a chat. But yeah, if you're not already, I'd love it if you subscribed and joined our little fam on here. I do weekly vlogs every week, which Noah is always in, and yeah, we just talk about real stuff over here. Nothing weird or wonderful.
No
just
fake.
Real. I don't get fake here, apart from I'm not really sure if I'm vibing with the vibe we've got going on today. So it's a new look, and you know, we look probably very glamorous, but I haven't painted my nails in a long time, and my mug is covered in lipstick, but
that's glamorous.
Anyway, we'll get on to the questions. So I asked a few times on my Instagram, what should we start with? Something in 2 years of marriage you thought would be easier but was actually harder. Like, I guess everybody always says first year of marriage is really tricky. Is there anything that we thought, or when we hit 2 years, that would be easier but was actually harder? I think I would say relationship with family. In our circumstances, we ended up living with our family. Yeah. Which I think in my head, like when you're younger, I'm like, oh, that'll be tricky to navigate for like the first year, but by second year it'll be easier. Whereas our dynamic was so different.
I don't think we could ever say that our first 2 years of marriage have been like normal first 2 years of marriage though. No. Like for those of you that don't know, we got married and then we were gonna move into Canada, and then the pandemic hit, and then we obviously lived in the pandemic, and then we lived with your parents during the first bit of the pandemic. Then we were going to move to Canada and the borders were shut, so we couldn't, but we moved out of our flat, so then we moved in with my parents. What we thought was going to be a couple of weeks turned out to be 7 months. Yeah. And now we're back in Plymouth. So it's...
And throw into the mix, like, intimacy issues and mental health and no jobs and no money, and like, God is good. God is so good, but...
So I think going into the second year, I wasn't expecting anything to be easy.
I wasn't expecting much.
So, if anything, I found things the other way around. I thought things were going to be harder than they were.
That's
but
cool.
Actually, like, our intimacy is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Our social lives are a lot better than I thought they were going to be. Like, we're living...
It's a different life than we thought, I guess. It's very deep. Got deep very quickly.
Question mark.
Best tip for newly married couples? I'll let you take this one.
Best tip for newly married couples? Have fun together. I think like first year of marriage, like depending on who you speak to, I think it's about 50-50. Like first year of marriage can either be the hardest year for people or the best year. And I think if it's either way, if it's the hardest year, if you're like not having fun together and you're like against each other, then it's just going to be horrible. Whereas if you're going through that together and having fun together, you come out strong the other side. Communication. I know that's quite a cliche, like everyone who's married says communication, but like just be open with each other. You'll find that it escalates if you don't speak to, if you don't tell the other person. For you it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, but the other person has no idea it's even happening, and then by the time they find out, it's a full-blown thing for you that could have been like rectified or like
you know,
sorted out.
I think the only thing I'd add on to that and maybe do it before you get married, but like air out your expectations of what you expect from your husband or your wife. Like those labels come with a lot of connotation. Is that the right word? Connotations? That like if you go into it thinking, even down to like who does what in the house, like have you always expected that your husband will do X, Y, and Z? If you don't tell them, they're not mind readers. Like,
yeah, we did our marriage prep. We did like a whole thing on this, didn't we? We basically sat down and went through like our because you always talk about like getting married and how exciting that would be, but you don't really talk about, you know,
like the day to day.
So it was really good just to like sit down and just go, like, you know, maybe divide it into different topics, like what does daily life look like?
Yeah.
You know, and get on the same page, like intimacy. How many times a week do you expect to be having sex?
Yeah.
Or like that could look very different from one person to the next, and that may not be something that you've discussed.
And if you don't talk about that, like one of you could feel like you're not doing it anywhere near enough, and the other person could be like, this is way too much for me and I don't know how to express my feelings. Whereas we went into marriage having already like settled on a lot of those things. Like even down to like household chores. Like we worked out what we preferred, so now we just know we naturally do those things. And like you'll get into a rhythm when you live with each other and work that out. But yeah, it was good to have those expectations kind of like, and down to like how often we're gonna see family, which that kind of went out the window.
Too much.
But even down to like, you know, you're gonna be away with the boys every single weekend. Like, would I expect you to buy me things or not buy me things, or manage our money, or...
I was gonna say a big one is like, you know, things that need to be done, that it doesn't necessarily fall on one person. So
like who sorts out bills.
Yeah.
And some people like to do that together. For me personally, it stresses me out. So we had to air out my expectation of Noah would be that he sorted that out in order to keep me sane. Anyway, did you find it hard to save sex for marriage? I feel like Christians should be more open about this.
Great.
Absolutely. We talked about it in our 1 year video. So like if you haven't seen it, I definitely would recommend going to check that out, because that's quite a raw, like, you know, that was closer to the time than we are now. We absolutely found it hard to save ourselves for marriage. We have been together since we were 14 and 15, so, you know, there you go. I also would say now that there's lots that's wrapped up in it for us, and I'm trying to see it from like most people's experience. We have loads of friends that saved themselves for marriage and had no issues going into marriage. Amazing. That wasn't our experience, and that's fine. Do I regret not saving ourselves for marriage? No. Do I regret not working on stuff around sex and intimacy before we got married, as in like the psychological stuff? Absolutely. Like, what does God say about sex is something I really wish like I'd understood before we got married. Like for those that you don't know, like we're Christians, and I think this works in both ways, but this whole stigma around, not stigma, but it's an important thing, but this whole thing around, you know, saving sex for marriage, and we've spoken about this quite a bit before, but the problem is that there's so much like shame and guilt attached to that, and that's not of God. Sex is not the enemy, okay? That for us, like that was a huge problem. Like we didn't have sex before we got married, but we were not perfect. We weren't perfect. That going into marriage, there was already a lot of shame and guilt and kind of fear around sex, so that when we were married and overnight it was okay, oh my goodness, we really struggled with this idea, and actually it manifested itself physically in our intimate life, as well as emotionally and mentally. Hashtag vaginismus. I think like, and as well, I would say that is worse for girls. Yeah. From the women I've spoken to, even that shame and guilt hasn't manifested itself in anything physical or psychological. The idea that your whole life you were taught that sex before marriage is the worst thing you could ever do, like it's the biggest sin ever, which I'm just gonna get out there, that's not true. you know, God sees sin as sin. And then suddenly you have this big day where you wear a white dress and then it's a-okay to like go for it, is bizarre to me. And I'm absolutely not saying that means that we can blur that line and do whatever we want before we're married. I just think like we are not preparing young women, young men who are going from that mindset shift, and we are doing, like the church are doing young people a disservice in that, and we are not showing biblical sex, God-given sex in marriage in a good way. And that is why I know so many Christians that have had issues, or, you know, I listened to a podcast of this girl who, the other side of the world, is explaining the same thing that I went through, and I know that we're not the only ones. Absolutely, there is so much more that could be done. Christians need to talk about it, the church needs to talk about it, and absolutely it can be done in safe spaces. Like, it doesn't have to be a YouTube video where we openly talk about it. And also, you know, even down to the practical stuff of like, and maybe this is TMI, but if you don't know about sex and we avoid that topic for your whole life, you'll either learn about it from the world and things that maybe aren't like the best for you, or you don't learn about it at all and you're like, off you go and have sex, and it's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Or but even down to like, I didn't know that I couldn't get pregnant every day of the month until like last year. I didn't know my body because nobody had ever talked to me about it, because I'd never needed to know, because I hadn't been having sex, that I didn't know that I could only, like, that women can only get pregnant for like a couple of days a month. I didn't know that.
And it's not,
that's my own body.
It's not that we're saying the church should teach sex education.
No.
It's more like, typically, our experience anyway in the church, and not dissing the church or the church leaders that we've had at all, but sex is almost the topic that's avoided if you're not married, and is celebrated if you are married, and there's no in between. And for us, it was only really in marriage prep, and even then there was very little to, you know, prepare us for the realities of that. Reality is that there are Christian couples that aren't married that are having to go through the natural motions of learning intimacy together before marriage, and that's normal, that's natural, that's the development of a relationship. The problem is that there's nothing for that massive group of people to help them navigate that in a way that's biblical, but it's also healthy, physically, spiritually and mentally, and that's wrong.
Yes, Noah, preach it. Pause for a little break. I feel like we're at the theatre, we're off to get ice cream in a little interlude. Next question, which we won't talk about too much, because if you couldn't tell, we're talkers. Contraceptives as married Christians, if you're comfortable talking about it. Thank you for that little, if you're comfortable, it's very kind. You will find Christians with different viewpoints. We have, even within like our friends, we have people with different viewpoints. So I think, firstly, like, I would say it's for you to figure out, like, with God, where you feel comfortable. For us, I was on the pill before we were married, and I was using it as a, like, to regulate my periods and stuff. So I was taking a contraceptive, but not using it for contraception. However, when we got married and started having sex, I stayed on it. My journey with that has been a whole story in itself, and I do not like the pill. I've tried many, don't like it. And actually, because of all our issues, I was using, sorry, we're so complicated, I feel like we're like, I was mainly using the pill still to regulate my periods rather than as a contraceptive. We've used condoms a few times, but we just don't choose to. But they are a great option if you don't want to put hormones in your body. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I was like, it's so bizarre that as a female, you know, you could have sex like once a week, twice a week, and you're taking a hormone every day for your whole life, when you could just wear a condom for like however long. I don't understand. Anyway, I don't have an issue with using things that prevent babies. I personally would never use like what's it called, morning after pill, or anything like that. But that's like a whole different thing. I know some people see them as a contraceptive option. We personally wouldn't do that. For me, there are some contraceptives that I wouldn't use just on how they would make me feel or what they would do in my body, but I think we just stand on the line as if it, no, I don't think I'm wording this very well, like
your Luce's like journey with contraceptives, like physically for her, have been a bit of a different one anyway, haven't they? As in, like,
just take the pill, makes me like a psychopath.
Every time that she's tried one, like, it really affects mental health and things like that. So we personally, although for the majority of the 2 years that we've been married, and obviously before that when we were dating, you've been on the pill. We're now not on anything, and it's the best thing.
Oh my days, I'm like a human being again.
Although there are a few, like, you know, we're not quite sure when things will happen, or like Luce's mental health is obviously still struggles for other reasons, but like the pill itself isn't affecting her mental health. And yeah, like Luce said, like if we were bothered about like contraception and preventing babies, which
just use a rubber,
we just use a condom.
Or again, like coming back to it, as a female, you cannot get pregnant every day. There are certain windows where you can get pregnant, and for some people that's like a couple of days. It could be like up to, I think it's up to 6 days or something.
Yeah.
If you know, if you don't want to use contraception at all, just avoid those 6 days.
Yeah,
like you will survive without like penetrative sex for 6 days. There are other things you can do, and yeah, like I know some of our friends, that would be their only form of contraception, is just not having sex during that period of time. And I think that's a great option.
I think if we were bothered about that, and also if we understood like your cycles a bit better, we would probably be more likely to do something like that.
Yeah, I think going forward for us, that will be our way to prevent children. Or we'll wear a condom. I am not going back on hormonal contraception.
No.
Ever.
Like for some people it works, but like on
I've got friends that literally don't even notice.
On a basic level, there you are pumping something into your body that is not producing naturally, which obviously is why some people take them, because they don't produce that naturally.
Yeah, like it was great. I was like clockwork, but it wasn't real. So just for me, I didn't want to do that. And that was another thing, like laying out our expectations. We went into marriage knowing that if I didn't want to go on contraception, like, so you would wear a condom. That was
a big topic, and I ultimately believe it is down to Luce what she wants to do, but it does affect both of you. It affects everything from your intimacy to, you know, having children, and that's not a small topic, and it's definitely something that is worth having a conversation about beforehand, because it can create a rift if you're not on the same page.
For sure. Chill one that's super easy to answer. How did you know me? We met at Creation Fest, which
shout out
is our fave. There's a little vlog of Creation Fest if you want to check that out.
Creation Fest is a festival down in Cornwall, for anyone that...
I was going to explain that. I fancied the pants off of Noah because I was 12 and knew no better.
We met 10 years ago, by the way.
Yeah, at Escape Park at the festival. Very cringy. Noah likes to tell me quite often and embarrass me with it. However, it obviously worked out, did it not? Yeah, so we met there, we texted for a little bit, but our age, and we didn't live anywhere near each other. We just stayed friends for like a couple of years until we met again. So we've been together for almost 8 years. 8 years in October. What's something you never thought you'd argue about? When we're mad, like when we're teasy and like irritable, we argue about the littlest of things, and it is ridiculous. Like even before filming this, I thought we were gonna fall out about lighting.
We fell out the other day because we were packing a shopping bag at the supermarket.
Yeah.
We were both really, really stressed and teasy.
Yeah.
And I was packing a bag, and Lucy thought I was doing it wrong.
Put the sausage rolls at the bottom and they were giving me a squish.
That was a bad choice. But every single item from there on after, I put in the bag. She's like, no, not in that bag. So I know how to pack a flipping shopping bag.
I would say we bicker more than we argue.
Yeah, we don't. It's very rare that we like actually argue.
But I think that's because we're good at communicating. We just, when we're like stressed and we just have a lot going on,
Yeah.
we're not on the same page. We just get a little bit snappy. Is it true when people say you never know someone until you live with them?
We were together for so long beforehand. We were together for 8 years, from when we were like 14, growing up together,
Yeah.
to then become adults and get married. Like, for a lot of people that may not be the same story. So we grew up together, so all those changes and everything, as you become who you are, like we were together, so we changed obviously a lot, but together through that time. But I would say, like, yeah, I can see how that would be true.
Yeah.
Even now, like, you know, Lucy would do something, I'm like, wow, I never knew you did something like that. What was that? And like, you naturally, like, you know, when you're married anyway, you'll find that, I mean, even from 2 years ago, like, we're just not the same people. Like, we're into different things, even like down to that. We've got different hobbies, even. Like,
Yeah.
Different friends that, you know, you start becoming, and
Yeah, like I would say the same as you. I think it is like, I can see how for some people they move in with whoever and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were like that.
yeah.
Because there's nowhere to hide
No.
when you live in each other's pockets.
No.
And as well, like with lockdowns and stuff, like there's literally been no escape from each other.
Right.
But as in, like, nothing has really surprised me. But I guess just because we didn't know each other
Yeah.
before.
We also, like, were at uni together as well, so I think that was a big thing, like, those years.
Has getting married young affected your marriage so far?
Only in a positive way.
I would say there are a few things, like financial stability comes with like straight off the back of uni.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that hasn't been easy at all, but we always knew that that was going to be the case. We're also in a massively different stage of life to friends. And our married friends are mostly older, so they're in a different stage. So we're in this like weird, like, our uni mates are just figuring out life and doing their thing and are pretty carefree, and then our married friends are very much like settling down, proper adults, and then we're just somewhere in the middle. So I would say that that's like another thing, but nothing like majorly bad, just different. That perhaps if we were like 25, 26, 27, a bit more like, I say established adults, but then there's probably 25, 26, 27 year olds watching this like, nah, that's not true. But we just have fun together. I would say like that's one of the good things about getting married young and just being a little bit like, whatever, we've got no responsibility.
Yeah. Like
we're just quite carefree most of the time.
Yeah, like we've managed to be able to do the things that you do when you're in your early 20s together, which has been really nice. Like even at uni when we're like 18, 19, 20, like on nights out together and things like that, that like have just made marriage fun.
Yeah, like we've been on holidays together, and like, you know, you go and day drink on a holiday with your best friend, which is just fun.
And I broke your glasses.
Don't break my glasses. Yeah, like we just do fun things together and we just don't really care, and yeah, I don't know, it's been good. How long have you been together? Almost 8 years. What does your partner do that makes you feel most loved? Firstly, if you don't know, get to know your love language.
Yeah.
It explains it all. Like if you just Google love language, it will come up. That was one of the best things that we ever did, was figuring out that we love in a very different way.
Yeah.
And want to be loved in very different ways. So for me, Noah makes me a cup of tea every morning, and although it's quite like simple, for me, I'm like, I was thought about while you were going about your morning. That I really appreciate that. I don't know if it makes me feel the most loved, but it's definitely up there with one of my favourite things that you do.
Yeah.
Because one of my high up love languages is acts of service.
Yeah.
You can't think of anything.
Mine's physical touch. It's a bit of hey, to be fair, like...
Wow, this is really,
really
good, isn't it?
Like the thing with like it's the thing with love languages is the things that are like out of the ordinary for that like you feel most loved when you notice that that person is going out of their way to do things.
Yeah.
So for me, my love language is physical touch, and that obviously does mean, you know, more intimate things, but it's everything else with physical touch, you know, like that touching of the hand and that hug, that kiss, whatever, during the day. And for Luce, although you've got like a heck of a lot better, it's not one of your top love languages.
It's my least.
So when I see Luce wanting to like cuddle up close or something like that, that for me is, even though that may seem like such a small thing that you would do with your partner anyway, I know for Luce, like she's wanted to do that, and
That's a good way of putting it.
And for me, that I notice that, and that makes me feel loved. The thing with love languages, again, if you have never heard it, is that the opposite then like applies. So if I wasn't to make Luce a cup of tea in the morning, eventually like she'll be like, oh, like he's not thinking about me, and so yeah, like that almost makes that a bit more special when you notice that person doing it. Definitely worth looking into. Like it works for every relationship, like married, friends, parents. If like,
all my days I told my parents about love languages, and they were then like, oh my days, I now know why, like,
yeah,
you want that from me, or
even like colleague, like it really helps you understand like human to human relationships, why people react like that when you do that thing. And parents, like I would really recommend you learn your children's love languages, because if you know you give them loads of hugs but their love language isn't physical touch and it's words of affirmation, but you don't say you're really good at doing this, then they may not feel loved even though you're like giving them all your love. So it's a valuable
it's a tool that you will never regret learning. Is there any difference between first and second year? I'm only just married 1 year. Congratulations. Not really?
No, although I think like you figured the stuff out in first year.
Yeah.
Like obviously everyone's first year is different, but typically it's a lot of like getting used to things, and it's a lot of trying to figure things out. I would say second year for us has been like we've been able to live out the things that we've got used to.
Yeah, that's true.
In our second year, like we moved like into this flat together, and like living here in our second year, like it's completely different to living in our first flat together, because our first flat was a lot of like, you know, that awkward trying to figure things out, like, you know, the washing hasn't been done in a few days, like we haven't spoken about, do you know what I mean, like little things like that, whereas like
it's a bit more natural, isn't it? Natural
it's
flow.
just natural living, and it's come with like new things like working out. I mean, our first year we were at uni, so the second year it's like figuring out how
we both work full time
and what that looks like, and just new dynamics, like trying to figure out how we spend time with each other when we're both so busy. And
I think as well, second year of marriage has allowed us to grow independently, as in like I feel I've had more growth in our second year of marriage as a person than I did in our first year, because it was all that trying to, and you know, we've done it through a pandemic, so that changes things, but it has been I feel like I'm established in our marriage in first year, so second year I'm allowed to like figure out stuff. And you know, we've started having more conversations about our family long term, as in like us becoming more than just the two of us, and financial goals, and a little bit more of a life plan, whereas I think first year we were very much still in like this honeymoon bubble when it was just so exciting to be married. We're probably just starting to get to a place of like, okay, cool, our marriage is good, but I don't want it to just be good, I want it to be great. So it's like, how do we how do we work on things to keep our marriage good and amazing, and also navigate all the stuff of life, and also not just stay stagnant in the same place, but like grow and develop together.
Really like encourage for people that have been married at any time, like don't get comfortable.
Yeah.
Like always have that something that inspires you or pushes you to be a better husband or wife or friend, or do you know what I mean, whatever that looks like to your spouse or partner. For us, we've been a bit more relaxed anyway, but things like podcasts like really like just make you think about things. Like one of the biggest things for us, and this is slightly off topic, but one of the biggest like things for us came from a podcast, and that's like date nights and things like that. Like for us, listening through a podcast, they suggested, like we were always around intimacy anyway, we've kind of voiced our struggles, so we're just trying to figure out like when sex works for us, because
I always just thought it had to be at bedtime.
And after a date night, when you've gone out for a meal and you're bloated and you're tired or whatever, like it just doesn't work. Whereas like this podcast was like, you know, try having sex before date night, like before you go out, like you do
what?
that, and then you get ready together, and it's fun because you've just had sex, and that for us was like a complete game changer, and just a small example of just
so
like,
freeing.
Yeah, because then you're the whole date night, it's fun anyway because you know what you've just done, but you're also, there's no expectation about what's going to happen. But that's just one small example of like how something like a podcast or a book or something like that can encourage you and your partner to just like get better, like be better at loving each other, and we've just found it completely invaluable, haven't we?
Yeah. Right, we are coming to the end, don't worry. What was it like living with your parents during lockdown? So as we said, we lived with my parents in the first lockdown, so for like a couple of months, and then we lived with Noah's parents for 7 months, I think it was, in the end, and of that we saw 2 lockdowns.
It really was like mixed, like there was some really like beautiful, like actually overall I think it was really nice spending that time with parents. Obviously not what you would expect to be doing, especially in your first year of marriage, spending that much time living with parents. Some people have to do that anyway, but to be able to spend that time with parents as a married couple genuinely was, looking back at it, like really special. Yeah. Like to get to know the other person's parents in such a natural way, and not in a, you know, once every couple of months round of dinner in the evening or whatever. Like doing life with the other person's family, I think was, it just builds those relationships, doesn't it? That like builds that foundation. Like whether you like it or not, you marry a spouse, you also marry into their family. Like it's something you will be navigating your whole life. And so there were like loads and loads of like really nice, like good things, that nice time together. I think for us, like as a relatively newly married couple still at that point, because it was 6 months? Oh no, it was March, wasn't it? So 9 months after we got married, we were still dealing with like intimacy issues, and we were going through at that point. Obviously living with parents, that made that harder. Just like space and things like that was a bit harder. And then like communication was a really big one actually. Like that was really hard. Like we were with people all the time, and obviously in the first lockdown you could go out for like, was it like half an hour a day or something, and that was like all you could go out. So we found that the only time we could like have proper conversations, like deep conversations that we needed to have, was on our 1 walk a day, which was also our exercise, which is supposed to help with like stress and things like that. So our like 1 walk a days like just weren't nice.
They were horrible.
Because it was like, oh yeah, you did this thing this one time and I didn't like it, and we really need to talk about this, and this is stressing me out. And so we would just get back from that like just not feeling great. And that was like that for, we were with your parents for a few months, weren't we? So and then with my parents, like we had similar issues. Like we weren't as deep into lockdown at that point, but to start off with, they had like a smaller house, and so like it just was like close proximity of people. The
only thing I would add to that, like, so living with parents was tricky and it had all those issues. The context of that question was living with parents in lockdown, which I think is different to just normal living with parents. But also like we got to see the benefit of it, like when we lived with your family in particular, like every Friday night was like games night, which I think if we'd lived in lockdown by ourselves, like we would have got a bit bored and a bit more lonely, whereas there was always somebody around. You know, you make it work. You can't just sit in a slump and be like, this isn't what I had planned. You've got to make it work. And you know, we're so grateful that like we were out of jobs and we were looked after by family, like financially, and yes, we had those stresses, but it was never a worry of how am I going to feed myself this month, which we're so lucky that we had that throughout the time where it's been really uncertain for a lot of people. So yeah, like as much as it was hard, and I can look back on it now because I'm not in that situation, you know, we really were very lucky and blessed in that situation.
We had a few months, just us two back in our flat during lockdown as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And I look back at our time with family more fondly than those few months.
Last question. What advice would you give your past self about married life and how to best love each other? I would say, like, on the whole communication thing, don't bottle stuff up to avoid an argument, like, because it will be worse. So we're much better at it now. I've always learned to kind of keep the peace, and which is ironic now because probably nobody would think that, but yeah, I've just learned that now it's better to voice my my actual feelings, because then we can deal with it, than bottle it up. And like at the start of our marriage, we would come back to the same issues because I would hold on to it, and it wasn't good for either of us. And lastly, like remembering that we're on the same team.
Hey, that's mine.
Oh, sorry. Go on, you run with that one.
I was gonna say, yeah, like remember you're on the same team, because actually no matter what like life throws at you, then like, you know, arguments are made easier when you realise that ultimately you're not mad, well sometimes you're mad at each other, but you know, your end goal isn't to prove the other person wrong or to win the argument, it's to get through the argument and try and figure out how you can, you know, carry on being on the same team again. And that's the same with everything. Like the joys of marriage are so much sweeter when you're together on the same team. And I would say like the harder parts are easier when you're fighting together for the same thing and not trying to fight against each other and putting in different directions. And I think like we've said communication, but learn how to argue.
Oh my days, yeah.
I think it's inevitable. Like you live with someone for, you know, like your whole life, the rest of your life, and you're going to disagree on things, you're going to argue. It's, yeah, you should go into marriage expecting that at some point you're going to have an argument. But yeah, we used to argue really badly, like really badly. I think one of the, again, this is in our marriage prep, and it's an easy one to, it doesn't solve all your problems, but really easy one to remember is hedgehog and rhino.
I think we talked about this in our video last year.
Essentially, people mostly fall down into like one category. Either a hedgehog in a fight, you curl up into a ball and put your spikes out, or you're a rhino, you just charge. You're emotionally driven, you just charge. And
Noah's a hedgehog, I'm a rhino.
Yeah, and but that's really easy, like good to remember, because actually like when we get into an argument, Luce is very much like, yeah, but what about this, what about this, what about this? And I'm like, I have these things that I want to say, I just can't say them. And so yeah, I think that is a really important one to remember as well. So that's what I would tell ourselves a year ago.
Cool. We really hope this video has been helpful. Hope you've enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about us. Like I said at the start, if you're not subscribed, we'd love it if you joined our little family. And yeah, hope to see you in our next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.